blue that merges with green that flows into pink and ends in yellow. The background of this graphic is groovy. The text reads, "When's the last time you heard a funky diabetic? A queer Crip sex archival project with Bianca Laureano." Next is a bold image of Bianca, a self-described fat brown woman wearing a black and white striped blouse with her hands on her hips against a colorful mural. More text reads, "The Annual Longmore Lecture in Disability Studies, Kathryn Kenley Johnson Memorial Lecture, in Contestation, Feminist Challenges and Change Keynote, co-presented by the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability and the Department of Women and Gender Studies at SFSU."
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It is really exciting to see so many people online. We know we've got some people joining us virtually. I'm going to wave right at our virtual folks and welcome them for being part of this event. My name is Emily Badix, and I am the interim director at the Longmore Institute on Disability here on San Francisco State University's campus. A quick audio description of myself. I'm a white woman in my final months of my 30s with some brown curly hair and a little black dress on. First, some access notes. This is a hybrid program. Shana Guraya is the Longmore Institute's new access and events coordinator, and Shana is running our Zoom program. So Shana is there to assist anyone who has questions or tech needs. For more customized and reliable captions, whether you're in the room with us or on Zoom, you can use tinyurl.com/Longmore captions, and that will get you access to the stream text. We'll also be taking plenty of time for Q&A today, so you can ask those in the Q&A box if you're with us virtually, and we'll get those questions asked, or if you're here in the room, you can ask them live. This year, 2 annual campus events joined forces and combined their annual programs into one as a means for building more intersectional conversations. So first event, this is the Longmore Lecture in Disability Studies. This is an annual program that showcases the work of someone whose efforts carry forward the legacy of Paul Longmore, someone who really beautifully bridged the gap between scholarship and activism in everything that he did, from his rebellious burning of his book to challenge SSI policies surrounding book royalty payments, to his longtime vocal efforts fighting physician-assisted suicide. This is also the annual Kathryn Kenley Johnson Memorial Lecture in Contestation, Feminist Challenges and Change, made partially possible by former SFSU faculty and staff member, Kathy Kenley Johnson, who is with us today. Thank you so much, Kathy. Kathy continues to be a tireless organizer for Women's History Month and awareness of women's issues, particularly around politics, elections, and representation. Dr. Kenley Johnson has been a longtime part of SFSU community, serving under then Dean of the College of History and Social Sciences. By the time Kathy joined the SFSU community, she had already established a robust political and research life that centered women's health issues and public policy. As a sociology graduate student at UC Berkeley and later at UC Santa Cruz, it was never enough to study social change. As Kathy puts it, quote, "We must make social change," end quote. This can-do attitude is what Kathy continues to bring to her SFSU community for over 20 years, both while she was officially working on campus and even now in her tireless advocacy of inclusive and intersectional education. This partnership with the Longmore Institute honors Kathy's commitment to intersectionality and bridge building in her social advocacy work. We are very grateful to be able to honor that work and continue it into the future with this annual lecture series. So thank you once again for your support. Thank you to Women and Gender Studies professors, Kasturi Ray and Julietta Hua. Your support bringing this together We really appreciated this collaboration, and we're so grateful to so many women and gender studies students and other SS State students for being here today to learn about this important, exciting conversation. Thank you to the Longmore Advisory Council members who are here and support making this all possible, and to our Longmore student fellows as well. We have 2 of them in the room. I'm going to point at them, but I didn't give your names to the captioners, so I'm not going to say them out loud. But I very much appreciate you. So with that, I would like to dive into our program with Bianca Laureano. Bianca is an award-winning educator, curriculum writer, facilitator, and sexologist. I'm going to go really slow during this because there's a lot of terms and names, but it's all the really incredible stuff that she's done. So I really want to shout out all of these incredible things. She is a foundress of the Women of Color Sexual Health Network, the Latinx Project. Did I butcher that? Okay, sorry. ANTF, Virtual Freedom Professional Development School for Justice Workers, and hosts LatinoSexuality.com. She has written several curricula that focus on communities of color, What's the Real Deal About Love and Solidarity from 2015, and Communication Mixtape, Speak on It, Volume 1 from 2017. She wrote the Sexual and Reproductive Justice Discussion Guide for the NYC Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, published in 2018. Bianca has been on the board of CLAGS, the LGBTQ Center at CUNY, the Black Girl Project, and Sister Song, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. She resides in Oakland, California. She is the, oh wait, I needed to update that. she's had a move. She is the lead educator for the Netflix film Crip Camp from 2020 and led the efforts to create a curriculum that is rooted in disability justice practice, self-determination, and social emotional learning competencies. She will receive an honorary PhD for her work of justice, equity, and inclusion in the U.S. sexuality field, or she has already received this. And at the Longmore Institute, Bianca has been hosting our monthly Cafe Crip series for over a year now. She's been an essential role in bringing together an international community of disabled people who want to be together in conversation. And she is a person that I'm extremely grateful for. I am learning from you every single time we've ever collaborated, and you have set the bar as high as can be in terms of your skills at facilitating and bringing people together. So for us, the Longmore Institute is all about trying to find somebody who's been hiding by facilitating others and saying, we want to hear from you. So today, that's what it's all about. And I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for being here, Bianca.
Thank you, Emily. And thanks everyone for being here. For those of you who are joining us virtually, welcome. It's great to be here. I want to give an image description of myself for those who need it. So y'all can't see if you're virtual, but I'm 6 feet tall, but I'm seated. I'm a tall, light-skinned Black Puerto Rican with big curly hair that is in a side ponytail, a la Lisa and the Cult Jam. And I'm wearing a bright pink turtleneck and a bright teal top as well. And I'm seated in my wheelchair. And I have my mask on with some trapezoid teal colored glasses. So it's great to be here at Longmore. This is my debut since the pandemic started of doing a hybrid event, one that I'm in person. It was a lot of anxiety to prepare for today, so I appreciate people joining in multiple ways today. So as you may have heard and may know me for a variety of different things, specifically hosting Longmore's Cafe Crip session every last Friday of the month, where we discuss a variety of topics about disability. And this Friday, tomorrow's session, is about today's talk. So you're welcome to join us again at 12 p.m. Pacific time. So what I'm going to offer you today is a little glimpse into the way that I have merged my academic training, because I think a lot of the experiences that I've been offering and been a part of have been more in alignment with community scholars and academic scholars. So I'm going to talk a little bit about moving through the ways that my training in community and also in the academy has resulted in my personal approach of quote unquote doing the work. So I'll be reading from my script, which I'm also going to post on my website later this weekend if people need to see the script again. But this all began 20 years ago. And I want to start today by sharing not just the beginning, but really the present outcome first. And that is an anthology where the contributors are all people of color, people of the global majority, Black and Indigenous people of color, all who are working in the US, not just US, all working in the sexuality field in the United States, in Canada, as well as Mexico. And we know this as North America. So majority of these contributors are queer, they are trans, they are gender expansive, they're disabled, they're intersex, they're parents, they're also artists, creators, and polyamorous. Our book is titled The People's Book of Human Sexuality, Expanding the Sexology Archive. It'll be available for pre-sale in June. And it has my name on the cover as the editor. And I want to share with you how we did it, because we didn't do it the way other archives or publishers or people who publish their work with a big academic publisher do it. So we were guided by a framework of revolutionary love. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but also a collective vision of liberation and a goal of expanding and correcting the archive of our work as sex professionals in North America. So I wasn't someone who dreamed of becoming a writer or writing books, yet I was raised in a community, in a culture, and in society where the written word is very much valued. When I entered the US sexuality field, it was in 1996, and I was a peer educator. So since that time, I never had a mentor in the sexuality field who was a person of color or who was working with my communities that I was a part of. So this became one of my first introductions into understanding how the labor, the experiences, and the brilliance of sex professionals of color were being erased in this field. So when I began digging in the archives later in my training and academic life, I noticed that much of the narratives that emerged by queer, trans, disabled, people of color about our sexual lives often focused on medical trauma and medical violence. I wanted to join those people who were changing that reality in the archive. Of course, there comes challenges when we remember that privacy is a social experience for many of us. Our lives are often under surveillance by medical providers, care workers, family members, and the nation state, the government. So what do we do with the ethics of filling the archives with our sexual experiences of joy, pleasure, interdependence, power, and liberation? What if some of us do not want that and instead want to keep our experiences private, sweet, memories of ourselves and those who were there? So many of my queer Crip homies of color have sought me out to share and ask and build around our sexual lives. But special care and attention to privacy was always a part of centering and nurturing that experience before we could move further together. So I'd like to share what it took to get an academic publisher to consider this text. It began by my choice in joining the calls for proposals for book chapters in the sexuality field. So as I said, I started in 1996 as a peer educator at the first university that had a health center dedicated specifically to women's health. And this was at the University of Maryland, College Park. The University of Maryland is a Division I university. And for people who don't know what that means, it means that our basketball and football teams, to name a few, are pretty massive and they air on television and cable networks. It also means that our faculty receive hundreds of thousands of dollars to do research. And that is a very conservative estimate for the research funds. So I have 2 degrees from the University of Maryland, an undergraduate one and a terminal master's for being in a doctoral program in women and gender studies. My first master's degree was from New York University in human sexuality education, which is a program that currently no longer exists at the university. So my academic training through those programs prepared me to do certain things, but not create the anthology from liberatory frameworks. So I had to take a chance on myself and the community when I applied for these chapters in these academic texts. So in the sexuality field, as I'm discussing it today, I'm looking at including primarily education, so sex education and sex therapy. In this field, one of the major publishers is Routledge. And Routledge primarily publishes content from sex therapists. So 2 years ago, there was a new editor for the sexuality content at Routledge, and she contacted me. And in short, she said, Bianca, you have written so many chapters in our books. Why don't you have your own book? And I said, that's a great question, Heather. Why don't I have my own book? So we met virtually and she asked me, what kind of book do you want to write? And I told her it would need to be a collaborative one. Knowing that North America, a majority of those engaging in sexuality work in various fields and in various ways, a majority of those people are white or light-skinned people. And I knew I had to be a part of creating a book that guided them on how to teach and discuss our wisdom on our own terms. As many of you may know and understand, when outsiders, quote unquote, teach our work, they don't often engage with it from the same place that we offered it, or understand that space to even begin with. So I wanted a book that would change the way that we teach and help train future sex professionals. A book that had more than a guide and something more than a textbook, something that offered a new way forward, a new way of learning and knowing. This is why each chapter in the anthology is followed by a specialized lesson plan to guide discussion, inquiry, and care of our knowledge. So there's endless ways to edit and support writers. And I know this from my own experiences editing and being edited. I chose the path of innovation and limitlessness. We used an open access and free service such as Google Docs. And we wrote our drafts to our chapters. Once an author and contributor said yes to the invitation, I created a folder for them and had their name as the author. And in that folder were 2 things. The first was a blank page that I titled draft with their name on it. And the second thing was what I call a quote unquote feel good document with their name on it. We held 90-minute virtual sessions, writing, but also to hold ourselves accountable through the summer. And we also completed our drafts and our chapters together. I updated the feel good folders throughout this entire process. So I describe these feel good folders as love letters. And I've been sending love letters to the femmes of color in my life for over a decade. And these are handwritten notes with an intentional stamp on the stationery that is so heartwarming to me in a world where we mostly get bills or advertisements in the mail. And author Erica Lopez wrote that letters and mail in her book, Flaming Iguanas, really highlights the way that I love and experience writing of these love letters. So I'm just going to pause as someone turns off their cell phone that's ringing. So I'm going to read a quote of what Erica Lopez says about writing love letters. And she says, I don't think people truly understand the joy of writing a letter on cool paper, putting it in an envelope, and addressing it in a funky way that challenges postal workers. The stamp validates the whole thing somehow. And putting it in the mailbox and hearing that blue metal flap swing shut is just about the prettiest sound in the natural world. The universal sound of closure, and a canceled stamp is just about the prettiest sight. It's almost love, and sometimes it really is love. It means someone thought of you for more than the 15 seconds it took to dial your number and leave the message for you to call them back. So these feel-good documents were snapshots of how we met at conferences, during our panels, online sessions, in the middle of community events, or some other way. So I wrote lists to people about why I loved what they would contribute to the book, who they have become as we have grown together, and how I've learned from them. I wrote about the ways I imagine our work expanding this field and how we expand alongside one another as we do this work from our values and principles. When writing became a challenge, I had hoped there would be something that each author and contributor could go to and read, review, recall, and engage with so they could remember and recall why they said yes in the first place. And this is what it means for us to do this together. This is an archive of rememory, as Toni Morrison coined in Beloved, a rememory of the past alive in the present. We are always already here. So transparency in the editing and writing process was really important. We used the suggesting feature in Google Docs, and none of the writing was ever deleted without the consent of the author. So you can imagine it was a really long document. This is one of the many ways that our book became what people sometimes call trauma informed, because we didn't delete anything or think it was trash. Every part of the way we just built upon it. I knew that this type of trauma existed in writing because of my own. I knew what was possible with regards to harm, and I knew there was harm that I could not imagine that might also show up in the writing process. It was only 12 short months ago that an all-white team of editors told me my contribution to their sexuality anthology was not well written, and that one bad chapter ruins the whole book. My chapter was the bad chapter, according to the one white older man in the committee. So I withdrew the chapter of my book that they asked me to write. They weren't too happy about it, but that's how it goes when you critique someone in such a way. And often sexuality professionals discuss consent. Consent is always around us, just like power is always around us. And creating a culture of consent together was one goal towards honoring and healing from traumas that many of us experienced or that returned for us in writing. So through this culture of consent that we created together as contributors and authors, some authors changed their original yes to I can't do it right now. And some of them couldn't write the chapter at all and had to say no. These were welcomed and celebrated boundaries and an act of caring for ourselves. Their folders were never deleted either, and they remain in the archive. So as the editor, I chose love. I chose love to be the guiding principle when offering the edits. I also expressed to each author that my goal with editing was to remain curious about their writing and their stories, and to support the flow and evolution of what they wish to share. Our vision was not to make readers more comfortable. Instead, it was to help readers to be uncomfortable as a radical form of consent, to unlearn what they had been taught and trained to do in this field. And as a reader, there's power in choosing who to learn from, power in who to build with. There's power in citation, like cite Black Women hashtag. We honor the consent that may emerge for readers to read or to choose or to skip chapters in the book. So this book also has an abundance of theoretical frameworks and principles put into action. Each author chose the approach they desired to include in their chapters. Some theories are used yet not named. For example, standpoint theory. The entire book centers this feminist theoretical approach, which values our lived experience and positions in society, to offer us a space to theorize from those positions. When you read the text, you'll notice that authors position themselves in various ways throughout their chapters. Black feminist thought is also witnessed in action in the text when the Black authors of the book speak to the issues and needs of Black communities they are a part of, and also offer some of the solutions to meeting those needs. When the non-Black authors write about why they celebrate and listen to Black people and community members, consider where your intentional relationships also may need some attending. Another theoretical framework and practice of understanding power and oppression, often called intersectionality, invites us to consider our relationships to ourselves, our identities, each other, and to the institutions, systems, and ways we experience oppression and harm. Many understand intersectionality by the work of legal scholar and activist Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. Offered here is an opportunity to witness how this theoretical framework and practice has been implemented for centuries by Black people in the United States without the name intersectionality being used, and also outside of legal scholarship. This becomes an offering to witness what emerges in multi and interdisciplinary ways, which is exactly what the sexuality field is, interdisciplinary. It also invites inquiry to consider what happens when we do not communicate across disciplines. What gets lost? What remains? What is redone or revisioned? Our queer and trans, non-binary and intersex, gender, and sex expansive authors are engaging in and literally practicing queer theory as the most authentic primary sources, our experiences and our work. So what you'll find in the book is a qualitative approach, embraced and celebrated. We invite readers to consider how we can create our own understandings of what emerges from the testimonies and lessons offered in each chapter. Testifying and testimony are central to this book as well. As the Latina feminist group offered us in 2001, an approach to testimonios, which translates to testimony. We follow many of our practices, but not all, that they offered us. The ones that we do follow that the Latina feminist group offer include storytelling as a collective and offering collective feedback to tell a fuller narrative of not only our stories as individuals, our stories of our collective community experiences. Readers will find the embracing of testimonia throughout the lesson plans and how we have chosen to be in conversation with one another through chapters that invite readers to engage this text in a nonlinear way is very intentional. The oral narratives, the storytelling, and the sharing are not often linear in this book. and neither is the expectation for readers to engage with the text in a linear way. So in their writing, many of the authors are practicing autoethnography. They may not use that term or any of the language in this theory and framework section, but that does not mean theory and practice is not being done, created, or reimagined. We challenge ideas of who our scholars are and what scholarship is considered and whose is considered valuable. Their vulnerability, nuance, and the reflexivity found in the book and encouraged through lesson plans is essential, and what we all said yes to offering. So as you read the text, consider what behaviors we discussed are presented, engaged as people continue to read, and also thinking about what did we learn and unlearn together? What's the exchange each of us as authors and as our beloved readers, what's the exchange received? This is power, and again, power is all around us. So we invited readers to consider the power held and the experience in these moments with this text, and invite you to consider responses and reactions. And if people want to share, it would be great to hear how they were received in return. In the same spirit that Chela Sandoval created methodology of the oppressed, we were guided by and encouraged readers to consider revolutionary love. So revolutionary love is a framework that I learned about in a PhD program in 2004, almost 20 years ago. When I was taking a class with Dr. Katie King, we were required to read the methodology of the oppressed by her colleague, Dr. Sandoval. In the text, Sandoval examines and offers a critique of theory and argues that a new form of theorizing emerged when US liberation movements and what she calls, quote, US third world feminisms guided the way. She offers that love is the new methodology employed. This approach I didn't fully understand when I was reading it almost 20 years ago. I was very new to reading theory in this particular way, and also was new to reading most of the people whose names I'm not going to mention, but will say they are still considered the canon today. And if that person comes to mind for you, then yes, it's him too. So I understand, and I understood the revolutionary love part very clearly, and it was in that text that I understood critique and accountability as a form of love. So this has guided my approach since around teaching, creating educational experiences, the way I construct my trainings, and also how I imagine virtual and physical space for participants to expand, be pushed, and to grow. And it's very hard work. And I think it's important to know when a theory or framework works for what you want to do, and also when it's not going to work for what you want to do. So I created an intersectionality class because there were so many sexuality professionals that are using this term and this theory and framework as a buzzword and don't really understand it. And I really wanted to help there be more understanding and clarity and a use of this approach. And one of the things that I highlight in this class is that it is okay if we are not really going to utilize an intersectional approach. It's okay to critique intersectionality when it's not going to work. And what I noticed was a lot of people don't know when intersectionality doesn't work. They want to love it so much, they don't always want to critique it. And we have to remember, it's a theory. It's not going to do all the things that we need it to do. It's almost a faux pas to say this out loud, but intersectionality is a US construction. And as someone whose homeland is a colony of the United States, and in a global context, an intersectional approach may not always be welcomed because of the US legacy of imperialism, of harm, of oppression. So it's important to recognize how diasporic work becomes a challenge and how US imperialism and capitalism emerges when or if we attempt to use something that's not organically offered by those most impacted outside of the US, especially those most impacted by the US. So revolutionary love for me was a way forward to being honest with myself, holding myself and others accountable with care and compassion, while also honoring what my no or my yes or my maybe or my more might mean for me. With the knowledge that revolutionary love is so deeply rooted in all of us that we allow it to guide our approaches. There is space to be fully human and messy and recognize our wholeness. And it's from this space of wholeness, messiness, repatriating, rehumanizing back to myself that archives became appealing. So the book has 3 sections. The first one is origin stories of safety and care. The second section is movement for body minds. And the third are oral narratives. Now, historically, safety in sexuality and sexology has been narrowly understood to cover a few issues, such as sexually transmitted infections, reproductive choice, and sexual violence. And historically, safety has been built by and for the white people in the field. So we began with safety as the first section because it's something that we as contributors of color, mixed race people, racially ambiguous people, people in non-normative bodies, disabled people, queer and trans and gender expansive people have only found safety in rare instances and exclusively when we are together. So safety for many of us has only been offered in the field unless it was created by us, for us. And these white spaces were never safe for us. They just never were, and many still are not. So we start with safety to build a new foundation that demonstrates what we have done historically and how we continue to elevate the work around safety in ways that benefit all of us. So we invite readers to consider what is possible when we envision and create safety together. Across the essays and chapters, writers share where and how racialized sexuality professionals find safety. When examining things like state-sanctioned violence that disproportionately targets us, especially those of us who are disabled, who are youth, queer people, sex workers, and working poor people, we ask, what are the strategies that we've employed, and what are the ways that we have modernized the inheritance of our birthright of safety in a place where our ancestors were enslaved, kidnapped, tortured, owned, and murdered? How do we make ourselves visible and recognize ourselves, our communities, and our ancestors? Exploring what representation and power means when hiring, training, and retaining people of color who are queer, trans, and disabled were welcomed. And these strategies and these healing processes guide us towards a more expansive understanding of healing than what is often centered in Western therapeutic approaches. So what are the solutions we have created, and what must still be done? So creating a culture of consent for ourselves and our children on our own terms. There's still a lot of work to be done, and leaving movement creators will also show their solutions and their paths forward in this work. So when we discuss the sexuality, the conversations are very much around body and society. Yet what is often excluded is a focus on the body and mind as a unit of reality, safety, need, disability, and humanity. So that section is a mixture of historical memory and archiving, the ways that many sexuality professionals have affirmed their work in the face of a global white supremacist practice. So we're reminded that this is a book that was created and offered at a time when movement is ripe in all areas, where there was a reckoning of racial justice and equity is explored collectively and publicly, and at the height of a pandemic and climate crisis. So what are the ways forward? What do we learn from past movements and labor? And how do we keep from burning out as we do that work? This is that growing up love James Baldwin wrote about. This is the archive from the wars and the battles we have fought, survived, and thrived in. These are our paths forward, and we welcome each reader to join, and where possible, along the way, discovering the voices and narratives of moving our bodies as a way to come back to ourselves. We also talk about topics such as abortion, immigration, queerness, religion, and craft a plan for healing from body trauma. So this section complicates the body mind by engaging with the ways we may be perceived as we do our work, how we must collaborate to move forward, and also find healing paths with our families of origin. Media justice lives in this book and also in this section. And because media is just a huge part of how many of us learn about sex and sexuality topics, it also becomes a space where complex stories are woven that tell a tale of a lot of white saviorism and the exclusion of those most like us. The section focuses on how the media is impactful for sexuality professionals and the populations that we work with. This section also expands on the ideas of media and includes the narratives from perspectives such as queer ephemeria and archival practices, how storytelling and oral narratives are shifting the way that many of our communities find virtual space for freedom and wholeness. So there's interviews with an archivist who shares their reflections on connecting to intersex justice and a new model for using fashion as a tool in the community education and therapeutic healing environment. So we create the messages and opportunities we know are valuable, and these narratives share how we do it in expansive and innovative ways. Each section includes media literacy. And this is often an educational approach that's been ignored and excluded in the US sexuality education curricula, especially those that are considered evidence-based and have lots of federal funding. But media literacy offers a foundation upon which to make the learning environment significantly more accessible, engaging, and lively. It also has become essential in supporting teachers, parents, and trusted adults in discussing sexually explicit media and things like pornography. Because media is powerful, and to know the US sexuality field has often ignored this important educational framework, is to remind ourselves of how limiting many view the field of sexuality within the public school system or in after-school spaces, locations where a majority of young people find themselves 5 days a week. That other anthology that I mentioned that I withdrew my chapter from, the editor suggested I completely remove a discussion about media literacy as it didn't quote unquote fit in to me discussing why justice frameworks are needed and helpful in expanding our work, specifically my practice with my communities and how I create curricula and training experiences. Then there are the lesson plans after every single chapter. These will challenge us all in new ways. So we created these lesson plans to guide the conversations that we knew would emerge after people would read each chapter. And so we knew that we wanted people to engage with these topics, and we knew that people but we wanted to encourage people and give people permission to go in different directions and allow them to keep this book relevant to their lives in the moment. So lesson plans guide what is possible, but it does not shut down or pause or tell us nothing's possible. Instead, there is a lot of lesson plans. So this is almost a textbook for the future. And as I shared earlier, we know that in North America, the sexuality programs that exist, there's not many of us, people of color, people of the global majority, people who are disabled, queer or trans or intersex, working poor or sex workers as faculty or even as students. So we knew if this book were to be used in sexuality classrooms, the majority of the people engaging with our work would not be us. So for this reason, we created these lesson plans to guide that process. Because without using the usual dehumanization lens that is usually employed to discuss us, our contributions, and our labor. Because we were writing this during the pandemic, I had to ask myself, what if I died before this was published? This led to succession planning. So death is not a fear for me as an individual. I know I've spent a lot of time with death, finding a death doula, preparing for the death that I want to experience if I'm given the opportunity to die with the dignity that I identify for myself. And also living in a country where mass shootings are a routine experience, and many sexuality educators may go into schools unprepared with knowing the safety plan of the school upon a shooting. So that puts us in a very unique additional risk of death due to isolation of the gun violence. And as a disabled person with a compromised immune system, when this pandemic began, I saw it coming in early February. Disability community here in the Bay Area of California organized to get masks, hand sanitizers, and groceries and other needs to each other. And I was one of the receiving and also on the organizing end of this work due to my relationship with activists and disability justice organizer and Crip ancestor, Stacey Park Milburn, who co-founded the Disability Justice Culture Club, also known as DJCC. So Stacey welcomed me into DJCC as a facilitator to help establish goals and build relationships and connections. When the pandemic hit the United States, especially California, where we live, DJCC organized, and I received masks, hand sanitizer, and disinfectant wipes. I was welcome to present on a topic for a DJCC brunch, where presenters were paid when we lost income due to the pandemic. Then Stacey died on her 33rd birthday in 2020. Stacey and I had connected online long before we met in person. We were young girls of color writing about ourselves, our bodies, our sexualities, our needs and desires. And we met through writing. We met in person at the Allied Media Conference. We reunited in California when I moved and relocated after my mother's death. We then collaborated with DJCC and as one of the Netflix Crip Camp Impact team members, where she invited me to co-write the official curriculum for the film with Dr. Aisha Turman. A large group of Stacey's friends, led by her estate and legacy holders, created a memorial service for her that was fully accessible in under a week after her death. This may have been one of the first large public car movements and rallies during the pandemic, which was socially distanced, masked, sanitized, archived via posters, video, and photographs. I stayed home and held space online for those across the globe who could not attend the rally in person, and offered audio and image descriptions of what we were witnessing through the filming of the rally. Over 300 people attended, I learned death is also a celebration of love, collective grief, and movement. The young women of color at the Radical Monarchs, a group that Stacy had been a mentor to, an instructor, discussing accessibility and disability justice. These young women gave us the hashtag Stacy taught us as a form of hashtag activism and digital archiving that extends across multiple platforms. As I began to continue the work of this book, I knew I could die if I contracted COVID. The news and hospitals were already reporting turning away disabled people, fat people, and choosing to focus on helping those whose medical teams deemed worthy of being saved. I knew I was not considered worthy of being supported, saved, or helped by medical doctors. And this was when my succession planning began for the book. I've often discussed succession planning, especially as I knew I was expected to go into an executive, quote unquote, decision-making position sometime in my life. Yet, of all the projects and organizations I've founded or co-founded, I always knew I did not want to be there forever. I still feel this way. Organizing projects, ideas, they have to grow. And that cannot happen if the same people remain in leadership for extended periods of time. My personal number is 8 years before I know I have to become something else in the organization or move on. So in thinking about who I trust to continue the work and who would honor the vision that we shared as collaborators, I immediately thought of my friend and chosen family member, a radical person of color, a writer, an organizer, R.C. Cruz. Similar to how Stacy and I met, so did R.C. and I. We met online via writing and blogging. I remember first texting R.C. if they would be open to me asking for help with a writing project. R.C. immediately said yes. And I wrote a longer email that started with, I may die or become ill. I need help completing this if I do. And I outlined the vision for the book. I was relieved when R.C. affirmed the yes via text and a yes in writing. I was ready and prepared for what was possible. So R.C. and I connected in June of 2021. We discussed the updates and the details, and I'd already gotten my Pfizer 2-shot vaccination in May, and I was incredibly ill for both injections. I shared with RC where our writing was at, and we agreed that I will ask for help by the end of July or early August if I needed help and support. And then Danny died. I had reached out to Danny to write about their experience as a dark-skinned, Black, Ghanaian, non-binary sex worker living in Chicago. They were one of the co-directors of SWAP, Sex Workers Outreach Project. Their death was sudden, unexpected, and raw like Stacy's and all the other deaths that occurred in a short time. Before Danny confirmed their participation, they were no longer on the planet, and I found myself attending their virtual altar, their homegoing and Instagram Live community events that were created for them. So death is the guarantee, and this is how I prepared. Historians ultimately trained me in the early 2000s while I was in a PhD program at the University of Maryland, where my fellowship was at the Consortium on Race, Gender, and Ethnicity. In 2018, I was invited to Johns Hopkins University, a symposium called Bound and Unbound, Contemporary Black Marriage and Research, Policy and Practice. Here we discussed love, marriage, and other relationships. And I shared the following. So yeah, I'm quoting myself here. Now that Hurricanes Irma and Maria have hit, what are we prepared to do to support and honor the displaced Puerto Rican families, kinship, and lovers? What are the ways we can build and preserve new archives that are waterproof? What rituals of partnership do Afro-Boricuas still practice? And why are their testimonios important for inclusion today? These questions I would like us to ask each other and ourselves. Well, rather than ask each other. Archives have been a part of my experience of self-exploration, preservation, and discovery for at least 2 decades. I often ask my historian friends, what haunts you in the archive? And I ask myself, what haunts me in the archives today? Avery Gordon wrote a book called Ghostly Hauntings. It's a book I come back to again and again. And she discusses hauntings from the perspective of the sociological imagination and reminds us of complex personhood and that we need to, quote, imagine otherwise. We need to know where we live in order to imagine living elsewhere. We need to imagine living elsewhere before we can live there. She also argues that, quote, to study social life, one must confront the ghostly aspects of it. This confrontation requires or produces a fundamental change in the way that we know and make knowledge, in our mode of production. So Ghostly Matters is an interdisciplinary work. It looks for language for identifying hauntings and for writing with the ghosts any haunting inevitably throws up. She also goes on to write that following the ghosts is about making a contact that changes you and refashions the social relations in which you are located. Ghostly matters are part of social life. We must learn how to identify hauntings and reckon with ghosts. Must learn how to make contact with what is without a doubt often painful, difficult, and unsettling. I'm haunted by the lack of sex archives for queer and crips of color. And I invite you to be guided by the origins of disability justice, creativity, and art, to find new ways to begin documenting your life and think about how to do so with love and love for self at the center. The intention that was central to this creation is one that I hope is archived, widely read and consumed, and objectified. Yes, objectified. I hope you, beloved participant, hold the book in your hands, feel it, smell it, listen to the pages as you turn them, and have a fully sensual experience with the book. And if you get this in the audio version or in an online version, listen with your whole body, read with your whole body, use those media literacy skills, and notice what techniques attract you and keep you reading. We did as we created the book. And so I call on us to organize to create another edition of the book, another example of what it can mean for us to write ourselves into the history that we've created and been a part of establishing. Another way forward to learn and unlearn and correct the missing parts that exclude so many of us already. The ways, the trauma of writing and being pushed out due to my writing from a variety of spaces has changed me. And I decided that the trauma of writing was from a Western, colonial, and white supremacist value that I do not ascribe to any longer. I chose to pass down joy and pleasure, not trauma. This is a new version of epigenetics. Feel what you feel and allow your body to rejuvenate and reconnect with the wisdom and pleasure your ancestors have provided to you through your DNA. Think of the wisdom and pleasure your ancestors found as you bring in the wisdom and pleasure as you read this book. Almost done, there's like 3 more paragraphs. I remember when my mother died 7 years ago in Puerto Rico at the age of 63. She donated her body to the University of Puerto Rico, a very rare decision in a very religious country where cemeteries and week-long commemorative rituals take place for the dead. Instead, my sister had organized that someone from the University of Puerto Rico Medical Center would retrieve her body, and we would go to campus and sign a bunch of very old paperwork. They told us we would be given a burial plot for whatever parts of her that may remain, and that we would be contacted in 12 to 18 months. In 18 months, Hurricane Irma and Maria came and devastated the island. I remember hearing the statement, cemeteries are for the living, and finding comfort in that thought. Today, I take that statement and find truth in it in other ways. The archives are for the living too. For those of us living today, and those of us who will be living long after we have left this planet. So I invite you to think about, what is your living archive going to include today? There is no expectation about linear anything. We have actually made it so that readers of the book must move between the pages to get to the other parts of the lesson plan and flip through other parts to find the gems. And it's going to challenge a Western way of reading, of storytelling, and of sharing. I ask that you begin at the introduction of the book, consider the invitation, because this is Afrofuturism. This is epigenetics. This is movement. This is possible. You are here now. You have already begun, and we welcome you. Thanks, everyone. I need some water. So Emily, I don't know how the question and answer period is going to go, so I'm going to let you guide that. And we have one mic, so Emily and I are going to go between the mics.
Hey, I am Shayna, and I'll be handling the Q&A portion of our event. So if you have any questions, please make sure you get them in. Okay. So I am a South Asian woman with black hair, wearing a checkered turtleneck with a blurred background. And I am very excited to join Longmore and be here. Emily, are we good to go? Bianca, are you good to go?
We are ready for, we can start with the virtual and then we'll go to in-room. Thank you, Shayna.
Yep. So Bianca, this was very powerful because it was so personal and real and clearly presented with so much love. So thank you. And now I have questions. Okay, so first I apologize if I mispronounce any names. So first up is Liz, and they write, lovely, thank you. I missed whether other collaborators' folders were visible to all the others. Were they shared between the whole group or just shared between one contributor and the editor, which would be you?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So it started out where it was just the two of us sharing the information. And then once things got into a final draft format, I sent all of the contributors a link to all of the content so that they could read what other people had shared. And so this is what I would consider like round one of sending the draft to the editors to review. And so I don't know if other people read anybody else's chapters, but I know that people were definitely excited. They definitely looked at the table of contents to see who the other contributors were. And so I would email everyone, and I didn't put everyone's email as a BCC or a blind CC. I made sure that everybody saw everybody's email address. So people knew and could reply all if they wanted to. Thank goodness nobody really did. But it wasn't a secret who was in the book to each other. So I really wanted people to view the final product and have a little bit of privacy as people negotiated the draft and the initial writing of their chapters.
Awesome, thank you. Okay.
So we have an in-room question. Okay, Shayna, they're still shy in here. So
I can keep them coming.
Virtual.
Yes. Okay, so Beth really appreciated your critique of intersectionality. And they write, during lockdown, I attended a lot of events that claimed to be intersectional, but so often disability is missing from the table. How did you ensure that this wasn't repeated in the archive, especially as disabled people are often infantilicized re-sexuality too?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that the anthology took us about 2 years to write. And that's because I'm disabled. And also there were debilitating experiences that we were all collectively having. And so I asked for 2 extensions, I believe, from the editor. And it was really because I was like, I can't do it. I can't get to it. And I know other disabled people couldn't either. So it really started with me centering and prioritizing disability as a narrative that needed to be shared. And as an approach to the contributors in the book. So a couple of people who originally said yes couldn't complete some of their chapters because they had surgeries or they couldn't process the information anymore. They didn't have a private place to finish the writing. So there were plenty of disabled people included, but they didn't get to finish their chapters. Danny was a disabled person as well, and Danny wasn't able to say yes before moving forward with the text. So there were a lot of reasons for why the book took so long. It was because we centered disability, and I centered disability justice as a guiding practice, just as I centered revolutionary love as a guiding framework. So all of those pieces, they were at the core. So I also just know that disability is never really welcomed in to Sexuality Archive, unless it's in a very particular way that is really for the readership of non-disabled people, which I didn't want to contribute to. So it was intentional, it was a core focus and a challenge as well for many of us. So there's at least 2 authors who said yes initially and then couldn't, for whatever reason, complete the chapter. So I say their name in the book. And again, they're in the archive of the creation of this book. They're still in the archive of the drafts of it. So when they're ready to pick back up where they left off, I'm going to welcome them and we're going to finish the lesson plan. And that's one of the reasons why I hope that there's going to be another edition of the text, and that this becomes a volume that is constantly being updated every 3 to 5 years is my hope.
Love that.
We have an inward question. Thank you.
Yeah, so I asked this question on Zoom, but I'm not sure if it contained my dead name or not. So I'm just gonna ask it out loud right here. My name is, do I say my name? Or okay, my name is Maybe. And my last name is Lim. So if you see somebody with the same last name, that's probably me, and it also starts with an M. So just exclude that question. So I just wanted to ask, I really enjoyed how you put a lot of emphasis on media literacy, and I really wanted to ask, how can we negotiate with media, how can we healthily engage with media literacy, especially when we find out that either the authors of a certain work are not very well liked, or not good people. And also, how do we engage healthily with media that isn't good in terms of content, in terms of just whatever's in it and what's described in it, both fictional and non-fictional.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. So there's a 2-part question. One is, what do we do with the work that's controversial, to summarize? And then also, what do we do with work that's just crappy? Around media literacy is how I understood your question. And so correct me if that's not accurate.
With the authors, controversial.
Okay, so when the author's controversial versus when the work is controversial is the correction. Okay, great. So I think when the author's controversial, this happens a lot. And I think it happens a lot, especially now with the internet and also the way that social media is being used. Because back when I was in graduate school, Wikipedia was just getting started, right? And that was like super exciting. But it was we would hear, it was more like shit talking than gossip. Like we would hear like, who was the crappy professor? Who was the crappy this person? It was because people were like, well, I heard this, right? Whereas today you can literally do an internet search and find a whole bunch of stuff about everybody being crappy. So one of the things that I try to figure out is that reminder of like rehumanizing ourselves. I reminded myself that everybody's crappy. I'm crappy. It doesn't mean that I'm a crappy person, but I've done some crappy things. And I have to assess, is me being a jerk to like this person back in 2018 enough for me to not want to continue to do A, B, or C? So a good example here is that there's a really well-known dead white woman in the sexuality field who created, according to other white people, a particular way of thinking about our holistic sexual lives, but she stole it from indigenous people. So I'm not gonna say her name because fuck her. And so this question comes up a lot, where people are like, what do we do? Should I even cite her? Should I even use her work? And I'm like, you should tell people what the fuck happened. Be honest. Be like, she went to indigenous community, she exploited them, she extracted their rituals, and she witnessed what they were doing, and she chose to extract it for her own knowledge and wealth. And here's what you're going to witness. What we're going to review, this worksheet, whatever it is, this is the product of her stealing indigenous knowledge. And then engage with it. Like, what are the ramifications? What is our responsibility in telling the truth, contextualizing the work in that way, and then inviting people to make a decision about it. This, to me, that process of like telling people the truth or like the origins that are often erased, invites people to practice body autonomy in a different way, when we get to be responsible for the knowledge that we're choosing to build. And we also get to be responsible for who we're going to be accountable to. So this white woman, no indigenous people claim her, a bunch of white people claim her, which is fine, right? And so here, that's the component of like, well, what do we do with this work? I don't necessarily think it's helpful to just throw it out. But if someone comes to me and is like, oh, did you find this woman's whatever? Have you heard about it? I always just laugh and I'm like, have I heard about it? Like, of course I've heard about it, but it's really to remind us that this isn't new. And it's also another reminder for people to know that, and this is a really specific example of like indigenous communities, but like, and I don't even know the specific indigenous community that she stole this from. Like, that's another layer of my lack of knowledge, right? But being able to say to people that indigenous people don't have to share anything with anybody. They get to maintain their own practices and rituals without us being witness to them. Like, so they don't owe us anything when it comes to sharing and collaboration. And that, I think, is a really hard thing for people to understand when it comes to, but I want to cite people, but it's so great. I want to use it in my work. Some things are for you to use. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Right. So that's a thing for us to sit with when we think about what we want to use or cite and problematic people. And so telling the truth and letting people choose how they want to use that work is also very telling about that person, because I've said this to plenty of people, but those people have ignored me and continue to use that work. And so then I'm like, oh, I see you, and I know you know better, but you're not doing better. So I'm going to stop referring people to you, or I'm going to stop citing you, or I'm going to stop until you do better, because you're showing me that you don't want to be a better person in this field. So there's that part. The second part is when it's like crappier work. There's a lot of crappy work when it comes to the sexuality field. It's so deeply rooted in like the medicalization, the pathologizing of our bodies and our minds. There's such a focus on the genitals when we talk about sexual pleasure. It's wildly gross in so many ways. And people are really hanging on to that. And so for me, I'm like, oh, I hear your question. I'm like, a lot of the work in the sexuality field is very, very crappy. That's coming out. It's not new or inventive. It's using some of the same dehumanizing models and just covering it brown or coloring it, a different ethnic group, but using the same approaches. And I'm like, is still crappy just now for that population. You know what I mean? And so I think it requires creativity. It requires risk taking. And it also requires knowing what's the impact, right? I think a lot of us haven't really sat and thought about the impact, especially now with like the internet. And I think the impact is, yeah, maybe it starts with a blog. Maybe you have a blog for free and you're like, here's my problem with this person, critiquing it. As an academic trained person, critique is a core part of the way that we engage with each other. It is not, critiquing isn't that, oh, I don't like your work, but critique is how we do better, how we push each other, right? So it's one thing to critique something, like the way that I critique intersectionality. I'm an intersectional trained scholar. I feel like I like it, but I also know it doesn't work all the time. And I know that because I'm a trained scholar in it. I'm able to say and critique, and that's a good thing, right? So critique can also be a form of love. But honestly, one of the things that I do that I've been talking a lot more like openly about, and maybe it is because of my privilege of being 20 plus years in the field, people knowing me in a particular way. But honestly, unless I have a personal relationship with a white person in the field, I'm not reading their work and I'm not citing them. I'm going to stop doing that, right? So in the work that you're going to see written by me, I'm not citing Freud. I'm not citing Foucault. I'm not citing a lot of these well-known people who talk about power and sex. Over it. Not here. Like, for 2023, it's not relevant, in my opinion, in the way that I want to move and think about liberation. Like, we're having completely different conversations. I want to engage two people who are literally here and alive, wherever they may be, and reimagining power and sex in a different way. So yeah, it's a strategic position to make that decision. But that's also about self-preservation. I just don't have it in me to read more shitty work by people who think they're so great because they went to this school and now it says their 17th publication. Like, it's just that elitism. I'm over it in many ways. Like, I'm not impressed by that. I'm more impressed with people who are taking more creative risks and saying, hey, me 20 years ago believed this, but now I'm noticing some gaps and some errors, and now I want to address those. That to me is more exciting and interesting. But that kind of self-awareness takes reflexivity and being in a community that's holding you accountable. And that's scary for a lot of people. That's my long answer to your great question. Thank you.
Okay.
Go for
Emily,
it, Gina.
to go virtual. Okay. So Trey, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asks, how do you use assemblage theory practically, or do you just avoid it? And much love.
Thanks. So I personally don't use this approach. I don't talk about it, I don't use it, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it's relevant to the work that I'm doing. So assemblage theory and its approach and the practice, my understanding is going to be as an outsider who is not engaging with this process, right? So I just want to be honest about that. But this becomes an area where we have to make a decision about what we do and don't want to use. So I'm very strategic, like these are the things that I'm using. And I think it's okay to also say, I'm not using this. Just like it's okay to say this book is not for these groups of people. So is my work in conversation with, or is this book, I should say, it's not just my work, in conversation with? Absolutely. Am I highlighting it in a particular way? Absolutely not. Will people read this and be like, oh no, this is an example of that in a year or in 10 years? Probably. Am I going to say you got it wrong? No. Like, that's not my approach to always correct people. Like, one of the things that's really exciting for me when I create curricula or lesson plans or books like this or projects is the way that other people are going to see this as an example of what's possible and then do it better in the future, like reimagine it, remix it. So I'm excited for what's going to be possible moving forward. I'm not stuck on this idea of like, it purely has to be in alignment with this particular theoretical approach. And maybe that is not That's not what I was saying. Maybe it's that me saying that is going to make some people upset in an academic or academics upset, but I'm just not invested in this puritanical way of using theory or methodology. I'm more invested in what more is possible. Like, I don't necessarily need the rules. It's okay to be like, here's my roadmap, but it doesn't mean to be the only part of the journey. So I'm open to how people view it and see it. And if you have another question about it specifically, I welcome that. But I personally am not worried about how other people might want to apply a lens of like mathematics to the book. I'm not thinking about math, but I definitely see this as a data set that people can do a whole bunch of work with in a mathematical way that I'm not even thinking about, right? So those things I'm open to. That kind of growth and expansion is exciting to me. And that to me is also part of the archive growing and being interdisciplinary. So yeah, that's my answer there.
Thank you.
Anyone in the room want to jump in? Joe.
I just speaking to the mic. Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a Longmore student fellow, and I just had a question. I wrote it down about. I really appreciated how much you talked about like the joy of movement and how that can be sort of contextualized in a sexual context. And I just had a question because as somebody who experiences chronic pain, I wondered if you had any advice or resources for dealing with sort of reincorporating joy into movement when movement has historically been a source of pain.
So speaking of movement, Emily is running around the room, passing the mic. We have a one mic hierarchy here. So yeah, the question around finding joy in movement when movement brings pain or is not joyful. And so here I think is one of the challenges with the way people talk about like somatics and wanting us to get back into our bodies and feel and take a deep breath. And what if breathing's hard and hurts so much? You know what I mean? Don't tell me to take a deep breath. That might make my back hurt. And I've gotten a lot of pushback from somatic workers in this particular example, where they're like, well, what do you recommend? And it's just like, why do I have to be the creative one? If you are the expert on somatics in the body mind, right? Like, why do I have to be the one to tell you? So I think, you know, in saying that, this is going to change, is my point. We've been lied to that our bodies only go through a change at puberty, and then maybe a change if you have certain hormones in a particular part of the body, maybe you'll experience menopause. But honestly, our bodies are responding to so much stimuli and so much environmental shifts that for us to think, oh, my body's not going to ever change again once I get through puberty is just a lie. Your body's constantly changing. And I say that to you as someone who is perimenopausal and like my hands sweat and the rest of my body is freezing, you know, so recognizing that our bodies and minds are just so expansive and also don't always have the answers. This is another critique where a lot of people are like, my body doesn't feel like a home because it hurts. I don't want to be in a place where it hurts. So my recommendation or like some tools is to like get creative in what movement may mean. So what this looks like for me, because I too have lots of chronic pain and it shows up every day in my life. It's always there, like, hey, is think about the way, so there's days where I'm like, why do I have to get out of bed and be responsible for our body? There are ways to move our bodies in bed, right? Like, and I don't like thinking about it because I'm like, it hurts. But one of the things that I've learned is that like, there's knowledge in the pain. What can I learn from the pain? And so sometimes I can tell when the pain feels a particular way, I need to move, I need to take a hot shower that will help alleviate the pain, right? So it's movement like that. Sometimes it's the everyday movement. Sometimes it's putting a pillow under our knees and maybe try to move our toes. Like it's a range of things, right? But it takes a dedication to understanding the way that our body is shifting and constantly changing, which takes time, right? So if we don't have the time to spend with our body minds, it becomes inaccessible in many ways. So it requires creativity is the short answer, but it also requires us to maybe even talk to the pain. Like say, what do you need today? But like this really shifted my relationship with my pain at certain times when I was able to be like, what does the pain need today? Right? Like recognizing that it isn't this foreign part of me that I didn't understand, but instead like I was disconnected from my body because I didn't want to feel the pain. So what would it mean for me to reconnect in alignment with like the pain that I was feeling and saying, hey, pain, I feel you right there. What kind of attention can I give you? What kind of attention do you need? And yeah, maybe it sounds however it sounds, but today, like when I think about the pain that I'm feeling like right now, I'm like, oh, what does that part of my body need? Oh, it needs to lay down in a particular way. It needs to stretch in a particular way. Like I'm able to know like what it means. And so I know, okay, even if I take some more pain meds, it's not going to change. The pain's not going to go away. I know that part, but it doesn't mean that I need it to be a part of me that I'm no longer going to be connected to. Right. So this may sound very ethereal. I don't know, but I feel like it's a constant learning process. And it really required me to be quiet and do a lot of hard work quietly. And that the answer always changes. You know, if I ask the pain, like, what do you need today? Sometimes it's like, stop wearing shoes. You know, sometimes it's like, go to the hot tub. Like sometimes it's like, ask for a massage, ask for a rub, or don't have anybody touch you. I mean, it's also about being open to what the information that you're going to receive also may be. And that I think is a really hard one too. If I'm inviting you to do some magical realism, is what I'm sure it may sound like to some people, talking to your pain, being guided by the pain, dealing with the pain and saying that it needs, it can feel a little, you know, different. But it also requires us to listen with our full body mind, and it's going to challenge us. Like it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be this huge thing that instantly works. So I think being quiet and doing the hard work quietly is also another way to do it. But that doesn't mean like being loud about it is wrong either, right? So I don't want to give you binaries because they're a scam. But maybe if I got to make noise when I have this pain, then do that. Like if the pain is like, do it, why are we silencing the pain in that way? You know, my partner and I used to live with a roommate that made a lot of noise when they were in pain, to the point where I was like, is this real? But that was me interpreting it in a very particular way. That wasn't helpful. It doesn't matter if it was real. It was happening for them. It wasn't a performance. And even if it was, this is what they needed to perform to demonstrate to other people, I'm in pain. Even though I wasn't questioning the pain, even though I wasn't judging it, I trusted it was there and it was real. So, you know, we're worried about how other people are perceiving the pain, like that, I would encourage you not to worry about, because people are people, and a lot of people are jerks sometimes about other people's pain, especially when they can't understand it. I have a lot of things to say about pain, but I'm going to stop there. Thanks for your question.
Thank you so much, Bianca. So we are out of time for our discussion today. So can we please have one final round of applause for Bianca? Thank you so much. So just a brief final word to remember that the Longmore Institute is here on this campus in the Humanities Building. And we welcome any and all collaborations and invite all of you to continue to come to our programs and events. We're doing a ton of stuff virtually as well. And this Friday, if you want to kind of process all of what Bianca just laid out and learn more and chat and share some of your own stories and your own thoughts, please join us virtually at noon Pacific time at our Cafe Crip event. So you can join at tinyurl.com/Cafe Crip Bianca. And one final word, the Longmore Institute is made possible, and our work like this is made possible thanks to support from our donors. Thank you to some of our donors who are with us in the room today. And if you would like to become a donor or continue support, we have some envelopes at that front table, and Shana is also going to drop a link into the chat for our virtual friends. We are incredibly grateful to the people who believe that we need stories that push forward conversations like we've heard today. So thank you so much. And I hope some of you will join our conversation on Friday because I have so many things I'm excited to hear more about. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you all.